the levellers to those who trespassed at Kinder Scout. Ordinary people are the ones who change history.
Justice is our liberation.
Hello all, good morning, good afternoon and good evening. Welcome to our online panel, Uprooting the Drivers of Deforestation and Climate Change, Frontline Visions and Pathways to a Transformative World. This panel session is being co-organized and hosted by Biofuelwatch, Colectivo VientoSur from Chile, FASE from Brazil, and Global Forest Coalition. We will have discussions on some of the challenges that we face today on the false solutions proposed and promoted right here at COP26. The panel will also address why these false solutions make the climate crisis worse, and it will highlight the injustices that frontline communities are facing as a consequence of extractive industries, patriarchy, colonialism, and green capitalism. We also know that several pledges and declarations have been made in this COP at random, and especially the Forest Pledge and the pledge on the rights of the rights and participation in decision making of the indigenous people and local communities. We also feel that the discussions will be linked to those pledges. We have four great panelists with us, my name is Shoporno Lahiri. I'm from Global Forest Coalition. I'll moderate the session. The panelists are in order. We will be beginning with Almut Arnstein from Biofuelwatch UK. Then it will be followed by Dennis Abdul Rahman, and she is from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and Climate Justice Committee, USA. Then Eduardo Gielsen from Colectivo VientoSur, Chile will be the next panelist, and we will have the final panelist in the form of Maureen Santos from Brazil, from FASE, Brazil. Each panelist will have 15 minutes to speak, and for interpretation, everyone can look at the globe in the panel below, and you can choose between English and Spanish. And any questions you can record in the chat box, and we will encourage panelists to react to those questions. And if time permits, we can also they can also respond to your questions live. And so we are going to start now with Almut Arnstein. Almut, are you ready?
Yes, one moment. Okay. Right, thank you. I'm gonna get the presentation up, share, and start from the slide. Right, hi. So as Shabana says, I'm Almut. I work with Biofuelwatch. I'm based in Scotland. And my presentation is focuses on a report that came out in May this year by the International Energy Agency, see the IEA, but their Net Zero Roadmap, which is a document that's going to inform a lot of policymakers and companies, unfortunately. And we're looking specifically at their vision for bioenergy and what that means for forests and for environmental and climate justice. So, so it's this report, and it actually net zero by 2050. And it actually got really good, mostly really positive coverage in the media, because it sort of looks at phasing out and reductions in fossil fuel use. However, it does so at the expense of very significant increases in bioenergy, and I'm going to look at that in detail now. And also to show why why we sort of chosen this as a really important topic for this event. Here we go. Okay, so if you read the report, and it's very technical, you probably don't, you might not want to read it in that much detail, but having looked at the bioenergy section, it basically speaks about a 58% increase in bioenergy use between now and 2050. So it's quite a lot, but it doesn't strike one as being, massively, a huge global change. So if you read 58% more than today, they specifically then say about doubling it in industry, tripling in electricity, 4 times increase in transport. So that's liquid biofuels, and also using in connections carbon capture. So bioenergy with carbon capture, what you've heard of as BECCS. So that's the overview of what you're actually going to read in that, if you were to, if you wanted to check the figures. But now, looking at the really concerning things and why this should be such a big issue for climate justice, what they're actually speaking about is increasing the area dedicated to bioenergy from supposedly 330 million hectares to 410 million hectares in future, of which 270 million hectares. Now, these are vast areas. 270 million hectares are classed as forests, but de facto, we know, that's likely to mean monoculture tree plantations, such as the one at the top, in the top picture. They speak of 130 million hectares of short rotation, so-called advanced bioenergy crops. And that's stuff like in the picture on the bottom right, Australian very dense short rotation willow plantation. 10 million hectares of this is conventional bioenergy crops, such as soya in Argentina. And from the photo, and more bioenergy and crops and trees to be grown on so-called marginal land, which is actually a term that is very commonly used to refer to community lands, to lands that are used by small farmers, by pastoralists, and by other communities for their livelihoods, rather than being under industrial agriculture or forested. Now, oops, hang on. Oops, little problem. Okay. Ooh, here we go. But do those figures add up? Going back to the 58% increase. Well, the basic problem is that they're speaking that we already have 330 million hectares of land, which is massive. It's of the size of a subcontinent, basically, under bioenergy production. Now, that is not true. When we're speaking of, I did a sort of back of the envelope calculation of, all the palm oil being grown for biofuels, the monoculture tree plantations for bioenergy, the soya plantations and more. And it doesn't come to anything remotely like 400 million hectares, definitely not 330. So that is first of all a completely false figure behind which they are actually hiding a much bigger global land use change projection. Furthermore, if you're looking at how bioenergy, so wood-based bioenergy at the moment is mostly met by simply logging forests and logging tree plantations that already exist. And yeah, I mean, some of the wood will go to your wood pellet plant, some of the wood will go to the sawmill, some of the wood will go to the pulp mill. It's not land that, you know, we don't have hundreds of millions of hectares at the moment managed for bioenergy. So this will be a massive change. If we are really looking at what 410 million hectares that they want to have by 2050 means, you're looking at the size of 4 South American countries combined, and more than that. It's actually a 3 times increase in so-called modern bioenergy generation. Right. Now, and right, here we go. If we go back to this here, why am I saying of this being a 3% increase? Because you can see here in this graph, the pale gray on the right, part of the graph that's today's so-called traditional biomass, and that is to end entirely by 2030. So, right, let's look at what that basically means. What does it mean that the IEA wants to end all traditional biomass use? Oops. Here we go. By 2030. Now, a little bit of what we're talking about with traditional biomass, we're talking about the way that around, I think, 2 billion people of the world's population are cooking. The main, source for energy is especially cooking. In some places, also domestic heating, and that is basically firewood collection. Some other types of sometimes it's manure, other forms of biomass, but very commonly firewood, and using that in basically DIY, 3 stone fires or very simple stoves that communities people have been using for a long time. That is what we mean by traditional biomass. That is what they want to stop. Now, actually, in some ways, that wouldn't be a bad thing, because the reason that people cook with collect firewood, when you see people, that is almost always women and girls. The reason that women and girls are sometimes spending several hours a day collecting firewood and then using that for cooking is because people lack access to clean cooking. They have not been given access to electricity, and they've not been given access to genuinely clean alternatives such as solar cookers or some forms of biogas that are really suitable for communities. And that is actually, in actual fact, quite a real tragedy, because traditional solid fuel burning, and it is mostly biomass. Actually, I should say it's fuel, but it's also traditional charcoal in many places. It is linked to major disease and mortality amongst women and children from indoor air pollution. An estimated 3.8 million deaths. People dying every single year from indoor air pollution. So far, you think like, yeah, IEA wanting to end that, is that a bad thing? Now, if they meant giving everybody in the world access to clean energy and meeting, the genuine needs of communities, that would not be a bad thing, obviously. But what they're actually meaning is something quite different. It's not necessarily replacing the reliance on biomass, but making sure that people use different stoves and that they basically buy the wood that they use from different sources, commercial transactions. Now, the thing with improved biomass stoves is that I spent a lot of time last year, I think it was, looking at the science around that, and we've got a report on the Biofuelwatch website, and there is really no evidence of long-term improvements in the vast majority of studies. There's no evidence of any long-term improvements of those biomass stoves that are being promoted as solutions, that they actually do improve women's and children's health in the long term. So the so-called benefits, there is scant evidence of them actually being borne out. There's also scant evidence of this actually reducing wood use in the longer term, and this is all explained in detail in the report, with some ideas why that is the case. So, you know, the solutions, the so-called modern energy, bioenergy, promoted in the global south isn't necessarily better. But very, very significantly, we're looking at different type of feedstock. And what they're trying to do is basically move away from women and girls collecting firewood themselves to having to purchase the wood from especially from commercial tree plantations, and to opt into a commercial supply chain of stoves. Sometimes they are wood pellet stoves, you need to buy the pellets. These are so-called green charcoal plantations promoted, in this case by WWF in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is of quite, maybe not this particular tree type, but quite typical, you know, using this discourse to further expand monoculture tree plantations in the South. Now, oops. Okay. Now, there's a particular injustice in this whole discourse when it comes to climate, and that is that I've got two pictures here. So, in theory, no, in practice, under UNFCCC carbon accounting rules, the carbon emissions from burning biomass, any sort of biomass, is not accounted for in the energy sector, right, or in the transport sector in case of liquid biofuels. So on the right, you have this situation where a French power station is burning huge amounts of old trees. Basically, it's carbon neutral and it helps reduce France's carbon emissions on paper, not in the real world, because cutting down trees and, you know, degrading forests is not what's good for the climate, but on paper. But at the same time, we're looking at, you know, loads of carbon offset schemes which classify the firewood people in communities use, such as this girl in Tanzania, as being non-renewable, and accounting, basically saying that the less fuel would this girl and her family burn, the better for the climate. Whereas in the French car plants, the more they burn, the better for the climate. It's a complete opposite, and that's a real, you know, it's a real climate injustice in that. Yeah, so what we're really talking about with a switch from traditional biomass to modern biomass is very often about changing from the commons to enclosure, to change into commercial, often fenced off plantations. Now, oops, need to move the Zoom bit here, can't read it. Okay, so what does the IEA bioenergy vision mean in practice? What does it mean in practice? It means a lot more monoculture tree plantations. Here, one picture, I think that's from Brazil, another one from the southeastern United States. You know, more monocultures. Okay, it means less forest ecosystems. This is from Sweden, you know, where you have a so-called Swedish forestry model, where you've got, you know, really beautiful forests. This is in areas that the indigenous Sami people used for reindeer, their reindeer herding, which is really important for their livelihood and their culture and their identity. You know, on the one hand, what it should look like. On the other hand, you know, one of those very forests having been clear cut in a country that prides itself of its huge role of bioenergy and renewable energy. And what it will de facto also mean is more so-called conventional bioenergy crops, such as palm oil. You've got some plantations in Thailand, and soya. They're from Zambia. I didn't realize I found them. I didn't realize Zambia was going to soya as well. It's soya especially grown in South America, however. And that is the case because for what the IEA is speaking of is making liquid fuels for cars and trucks and increasingly for aviation, which they want to quadruple the amount they're using. They're speaking of using stuff like switchgrass plantations, willow plantations, misconsus plantations, which still plantations, still really problematic, industrial agriculture, also called agricultural residues. But For technical reasons, I can put a report explaining the reasons. This doesn't really work. You can't really use this sort of biomass to make liquid biofuels. Hence, you're going to have a lot more of what we've just seen of soya and palm oil and similar crops instead, because these sources just are not suitable for liquid biofuels. So in conclusion, the IEA's vision is really, should be one that should really alarm anybody who believes in climate, in climate and environmental justice. It's a vision of ending traditional biomass, not by securing clean cooking, genuinely clean cooking for people, but as a massive resource grab. As enclosures again, rather than empowering communities. It relies on land conversions on the scale of Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay combined and more. And implies it implies land and water grabbing and expansion of industrial tree plantations and crop plantations on a vast scale. And that's me. Oh, shall I just say, lead on to the next speaker, Shapana, maybe to say?
No. I'll do.
You do that.
Just take your presentation off the screen so that, we can proceed. Yeah, thanks, Almut. So let me invite Dennis Abdul Rahman from, and she will most likely speak on the impacts of pellet production in the US. Yeah, Dennis, here you are.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here. I'd like to share on behalf of the NAACP the impacts of pellet productions on Blacks and other frontline communities. And in 2001, the NAACP passed a resolution in opposition to wood pellet manufacturing and the use of wood bioengineering. And we have a lot of thanks to give to our national board, ECJ, or Environmental Climate Justice Committee Chair, Catherine Eglin, which many of you know, who lives in the Gulfport, Mississippi area. And many of the southern areas of the United States are very prevalent with this deforestation and wood pellet manufacturing that is occurring. And here you can see the map where there are several of the southern states of the United States that are participating within this wood pellet manufacturing. Here is the dogwood and a nonprofit called ECO, an environmental integrity project, the NAACP Mississippi State Conference, all calling and sending out a joint statement to oppose a major plant there called the Drax or the Drake's facility. This facility was fined $2.5 million for a major pollution violation, one of the biggest fines that have ever occurred. Within this small Mississippi town, it has been blasted with the toxins for many, many years. And so it was high time for this company to be levied against. There is such a popularization of the use of wood pellets, sometimes referred to as bioenergy or wood biomass. And in the results, oftentimes well-intentioned, but desperate for the need to try to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius in accordance with the goals at that time of the Paris Climate Accord. However, there are so many hazardous toxins and the Manufacturing of the wood pellets has proven clear-cut case of environmental injustice by wood biomass industry, located and operating in close proximity to low income and communities of color. The manufacturing of these wood pellets pose significant dangers to human health from toxic level exposures such as particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, so on and so forth, as you can see there on the slide. These industries are mostly foreign-based and appear to have patterns of targeting economic deprived states and lacks environmental oversight here in the United States and skirting provisions such as our Clean Air Act by grossly underestimating the amount of dangerous toxins that they will be emitting. Thereby, they avoid the Environmental Protection Agency's stringent oversight and investing in installation of the required best and available control technologies. There was a critically acclaimed report that has a summary of findings that was done by the Environmental Integrity Project. And in 2017, it stated that at least a third of wood pellet plants, 7 out of 21, violated their permit limits by releasing illegal amounts of pollution, while another 4 plants had faulty permits issued by state government that failed to require pollution control equipment required by the Federal Clean Air Act. And overall, more than half of the plants, 11 out of 21, either failed to keep emissions below the legal limits or failed to install required pollution control. 85% of the African-American population live near the Drake's plant in a small town called Gloucester. And 58% of the poverty rate is the typical demographics for the wood pellet industry. And this Drake's former giant in the fossil fuel energy production is based in the United Kingdom, has converted to burning wood pellets and is now the world's largest wood pellet manufacturer, followed by the UK-based Enviva. And this Drake's and Enviva are heavily subsidized in the UK and the United States. And currently dominate the world pellets production in the United States while committing egregious human rights violations and crimes against humanity by wantonly and grossly and falsely reporting their emissions. And lastly, I'll just say that the NAACP has called on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, warning them that, global scientists, that this biomass use is even worse than coal by emitting almost double the amount of CO2 into the atmosphere, that this wood pellet industry continues to be aided in propaganda campaigns and touting wood biomass as clean and renewable energy source when we know that it's not. The NAACP has, called on the Article 6 in the Paris Accord, and I believe here now at the COP26, to really look at that and to know that there is double counting that is occurring in these carbon emission tradings. And even though when trees are cut, they release decades or centuries of stored carbon into the atmosphere, then more carbon is released throughout the wood pellet manufacturing process on this side of the Atlantic in the United States to the burning of the wood pellets for energy on the other side here, where we are in the COP26 area. Article 6 loopholes against double counting has resulted in zero counting of the carbon emissions from the wood burning bioindustry. So the NAACP is appealing here to the COP26, to our EPA administrator, Michael Reagan, to our president of the United States, and all of the decision makers, the US Department of Agriculture, to really stop this wood pellet, this false solution, and to move us into real clean energy solutions, and that the frontline communities, Black, Indigenous, and communities of color are being most highly impacted by these flawed decisions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis, for an excellent impact presentation. I would like, just before I invite Eduardo, I'd like Almut probably to link this with the Drax scenario here in UK. Almut, can you just have a couple of minutes to link up the story that Dennis has just presented with what is happening in the UK in terms of Drax?
Yes, so as Denise said, Drax is actually the biggest biomass, Drax group operates Drax power station in Yorkshire in England, which is the world's biggest biomass burning plant, wood burning plant. They are the second biggest pellet producer in the world, having taken over a Canadian company, as well as having pellet mills in the United States. And they also source pellets from the currently biggest pellet producer Enviva, which is, I think, where Denise's first photo came, was one I recognize as one associated with Enviva. And they are right now at the COP. They seem to be speaking day after day after day at different events. At the moment, at the global so-called Sustainability Forum this week, tomorrow at an event by the World Bioenergy Association, promoting themselves as one of the greenest businesses in the world, and speaking about plans to capture carbon and become even greener, despite all the realities that we've just heard about from Denise.
Yeah, thanks, Almut, for linking that. So I invite Eduardo Gerson from Colectivo VientoSur Chile. Eduardo and his colleagues in Colectivo VientoSur are working on the ground and have a lot of experience fighting the plantations, the Chilean forestry model, and Eduardo will also perhaps touch upon a bit on the bioenergy and biomass burning from plantations in Chile. Eduardo, please.
Hola, Suparna. Y bueno, muchas gracias por la invitación a las organizaciones con quienes estamos co-organizando esta actividad. Muchas gracias por esta posibilidad de compartir en el marco de la Cumbre de los Pueblos de la COP26, que claramente es donde se están hablando las cosas en serio. La misma cumbre de gobiernos nuevamente se ha transformado en un espacio de fraudes, ¿ya? De permanentes falacias y de promoción de grandes negocios en lugar de enfrentar de manera seria la grave crisis que estamos enfrentando. Y bueno, desde América Latina desde el colectivo VientoSur, junto con nuestras alianzas internacionales, en este caso nuestra membresía en la Coalición Mundial por los Bosques, y al mismo tiempo en la Plataforma Latinoamericana y del Caribe por la Justicia Climática, vemos cómo se entrelazan todas las problemáticas ambientales y sociales en esta crisis global. Y para América Latina, como siempre, desde nuestros movimientos impulsamos y seguimos luchando por los cambios sistémicos que es necesario lograr para resolver esta crisis, que es una crisis de sistema. La deforestación en América Latina y el Caribe es parte de una larga historia de usurpación de territorios, de vulneración de derechos, de destrucción de ecosistemas, de desplazamiento de comunidades y de todo tipo de violaciones de derechos humanos y ambientales. Y bueno, para quienes quieran hacerlo, un gran antecedente en nuestra región es el libro de Eduardo Galeano, Las venas abiertas de América Latina, que muestra cómo desde los periodos de la colonia, nuestros territorios y su naturaleza fueron, y sus pueblos indígenas fueron devastados para la codicia, ¿ya?, de quienes en ese minuto iniciaban estos procesos de colonización y que ha transcurrido durante más de 5 siglos. En el caso de Chile, hay un antecedente histórico importante en la deforestación, que es la quema intencional por parte del Estado chileno de miles de hectáreas para abrir espacio a los asentamientos y fundamentalmente a la actividad ganadera de los colonos europeos que vinieron a instalarse durante los últimos 2 o 3 siglos. Y al mismo tiempo se verificó el genocidio de pueblos indígenas, donde aparece como emblemático el prácticamente extinción del pueblo Selknam en la Patagonia, en el extremo sur austral de nuestro país. Y bueno, posteriormente, y es a donde vamos ahora a relatar, viene el modelo en el cual hoy día estamos enfrentando, que fue impuesto a sangre y fuego por la dictadura de Pinochet, que sin embargo no fue, y mucho de lo que vamos a ver ahora se lo debemos a que no fue una dictadura puramente militar, como otras de América Latina, sino que fue una dictadura que permitió y promovió la implementación muy disciplinada del modelo neoliberal en Chile, a través de dejando todo el manejo económico del país en manos de los economistas de la Escuela de Chicago, formados en la Escuela de Chicago, economistas chilenos, por cierto, formados en la Escuela de Chicago, en la cátedra de Milton Friedman, y que impuso, ¿no es cierto?, este dogma de las privatizaciones y de reducir el Estado a un rol meramente subsidiario. Y esto en materia de deforestación o en materia forestal se expresó en primer lugar en la contrarreforma agraria, es decir, en revertir los avances que se habían tenido en los años anteriores, en los años 60 y 70 del siglo pasado, en materia de reforma agraria y de distribuir la tierra entre los campesinos y entre los pueblos indígenas, fundamentalmente el pueblo mapuche y volver a quitarle esas tierras a los campesinos y a los indígenas, fundamentalmente mapuches, y dejar estas tierras en manos de las grandes corporaciones, de los grandes grupos económicos y las familias más ricas de nuestro país. Y en segundo lugar, consistió en precisamente este Estado subsidiario, expresarlo en términos de implementar un subsidio para impulsar las plantaciones forestales a gran escala en nuestro país. Plantaciones que ya se venían de alguna manera desarrollando de manera todavía muy experimental, con un objetivo fundamentalmente de enfrentar la erosión en algunas zonas del país, cosa que por cierto no funciona, ¿ya? Pero que en este caso se le entregó subsidios que alcanzan incluso el valor del 80% de las inversiones a estas plantaciones a gran escala, que fueron utilizadas incluso por estas grandes corporaciones. Esto ha hecho que al día de hoy tengamos, tras unos años de sustitución de bosque nativo, que después se prohibió cuando surgió la ley de bosque nativo, pero también el reemplazo de la agricultura campesina, hoy día tenemos alrededor de 3 millones de hectáreas de plantaciones de pinos y eucaliptos en nuestro país, que estamos hablando más o menos del 5% de todo el territorio nacional. Es realmente gigantesco. Hay regiones donde los porcentajes de plantaciones forestales alcanzan mucho más del 5%, es decir, incluso hay comunas donde más de la mitad de todo el territorio de la comuna está cubierto por plantaciones forestales. Esto ha sido complementado, es decir, esta lógica de las plantaciones forestales a gran escala ha sido complementado por la diseminación de plantas de celulosa, que son decenas de plantas de celulosa en los territorios donde están las plantaciones, y al mismo tiempo asociado a las plantas de celulosa se han ido implementando plantas de biomasa, es decir, de cogeneración de energía eléctrica a partir de biomasa forestal, en principio para alimentar las propias plantas de celulosa, pero que posteriormente se han ido entregando, se han ido sobredimensionando para entregarle también a la energía eléctrica a la red, y de esta manera reemplazar supuestamente energías más contaminantes como las de energía fósil, y de esta manera estas plantas de biomasa logran, ¿no es cierto?, emitir créditos de carbono ya para participar en los mercados de carbono a nivel mundial. En este modelo podemos ver entonces al menos 3 falsas soluciones actuando conjuntamente. Las grandes plantaciones forestales de pinos y eucalipto, que actúan como sumideros de carbono, ¿ya? Pero que lejos de resolver el problema del cambio climático, dejan sin agua a grandes extensiones y muchas comunidades, ya que hoy día en zonas incluso donde hay mucha lluvia, tienen que recibir agua de camiones municipales para poder tener agua. Por otro lado, tenemos la falsa solución de la bioenergía, que supuestamente es carbono neutral, ¿ya? Pero bien sabemos que no es efectivamente carbono neutral, ¿ya? Que hay una serie de aspectos de carácter intertemporal y de carácter de actividades asociadas a esta actividad que hacen que la bioenergía no sea carbono neutral. Y en tercer lugar tenemos la falsa solución de los mercados de carbono, ¿ya? Que especulan con las emisiones a nivel mundial. Y todas estas falsas soluciones presentes en el modelo forestal chileno están actuando juntas y retardando y por el contrario fortaleciendo ya el modelo neoliberal que precisamente y extractivista que es el que genera el cambio climático. Para terminar voy a enfocarme en el caso de Arauco, ¿ya? Es el grupo forestal más grande en el modelo forestal chileno. Tiene más de 1 millón de hectáreas, de las 3 millones que hay en el país, más de 1 millón de hectáreas aproximadamente pertenecen a Arauco. Tiene también al menos una decena de plantas de celulosa y plantas de biomasa, no solo en Chile, sino también en otros países de América Latina, como Brasil. Después Morín va a hablar de Brasil también. Y bueno, y es uno de las empresas a esta altura ya multinacionales que está lavando su imagen, que está haciendo greenwashing a partir de toda esta cadena. Arauco hace poco tiempo declaró que era la primera empresa forestal del mundo en certificar su carbono neutralidad, que como sabemos es una etapa anterior a declarar que es cero neto, que es algo que seguramente en la cual están ya trabajando para declarar que también son cero neto. Esta otra gran falsa solución ya que hoy día en la COP26 está tan en boga. Para finalizar, comentar que con el apoyo de Global Forest Coalition, la Coalición Mundial de los Bosques, y Environmental Paper Network también, hemos realizado hace poco tiempo un estudio sobre un caso específico que es una planta de bioenergía en la zona de Valdivia, muy cerca de la ciudad de Valdivia, en el sur, que precisamente está ya en su segundo periodo de certificación de créditos de carbono, y de esta manera lavando y pintando su imagen nuevamente de verde, una empresa que tiene prontuario criminal en nuestros territorios, ya tiene grandes desastres ambientales. Esa misma planta tiene un conflicto permanente, ya tanto en sus cercanías como en la costa, también por donde, en sus cercanías primero, digamos, por haber contaminado fuertemente un río completo y haber afectado a muchos ecosistemas y comunidades, digamos, que están en las inmediaciones en la cuenca de ese río, que es el río Cruces, y al mismo tiempo tiene conflicto con zonas costeras por donde pretende esta misma empresa tirar sus residuos líquidos al mar. Con esto, bueno, eso es un informe que ya está disponible en la página, en el sitio web de la Global Forest Coalition, y que les invitamos a leer porque puede ayudar a complementar esta mirada general sobre las falsas soluciones en el modelo forestal chileno y en general el modelo de plantaciones forestales y bioenergía. Muchas gracias.
Excellent, Eduardo. Thank you very much. We need more and more stories to expose the false solutions emerging out of the carbon markets and how the whole issue of net zero and so-called carbon neutrality is very much embedded in the false solutions of the carbon market. So we now go to our final panelist, Maureen Santos from FASE. Maureen, if you could self-introduce yourself a bit and then, start.
Thank you, Suparna. I'm Maureen Santos. I'm a coordinator of the National Advisory Group of FASE NGO in Brazil. We are also part of the Global Forest Coalition and Grupo Carta de Belém. I'm very happy to be here with you all in the People's Summit during the COP26. What's going on? It's okay. Are you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Morning.
Just coming back. So I'd like to share a presentation with you. I will specific as I come from Brazil. I probably have interest about what's going on in the relation to these drivers of deforestation in Brazil, especially not only Amazon, but also in the Cerrado biome and Pantanal. So I would start my presentation, talk about these drivers of deforestation, the relation with then the climate, so after about how can we are facing these problems, and also the connection to the COP26 negotiations, especially in the Article 6. We have right now, you have in Brazil, this meat and agroindustrial complex as a main driver of deforestation all over our ecological regions. Here, of course, you hear much more about Amazon because it's the biggest forest and ecological region you have in Brazil, but you also have other very important ecological region like Cerrado. That's a kind of savanna that there is our water production in Brazil. So to analyze this industrial livestock system, it's important to understand also the soybean complex and also the poultry production. But as we don't have too much time, I only talk more about soybean livestock. Brazil is the biggest exporter and the world's second biggest producer of soybean. We have around 33.3 million of hectares of producing of soybean, and we have now in the last 10 years more or less expansion of this production to the Cerrado biome in this area that's called Mato Piba. Mato Piba is because take the first acronym of the four federal regions in Brazil: Mato Grosso, Tocantins, Piauí, and Bahia. And in 10 years, they have expect to increase to 33 to 41 million hectares. They have a production of 95.6 million tons, and if 90% of that is destined to the animal food production, and 7% it's destined to export to China and European Union. We have this horrible agrobusiness model of production. It's worldwide, and Brazil is the same, with the concentration of big monoculture properties, a very high-tech way of production, and with big data also. They don't have the majority of the property doesn't have too many people working with. It's all technical machinery or auto machinery that work by itself, by computer. You have a huge commercialization and the inputs in this soybean production. It's pesticides, using a lot of pesticides and OGM in 92% of the crops. It's a very categorized by participation of multinational corporations in the sector, and with extensive environmental, territorial, and social impact, and also like water, like the food sovereignty, security, and other examples. About the livestock, Brazil is the second biggest producer and exporter and consumer. 14% of the world consumers is very important. Not now, this number reduced a lot after the pandemic, because Brazil right now it's increasing a lot, the poverty and hungry. So it's reducing this number. We have around 212 million heads of cattle. So it's almost the same number of cattle. We have the same number of people in Brazil, and with around 200 million hectares of it's like 6 times the soybean production in Brazil. That's a lot. So it's huge. And all this, it's connected right now with the Bolsonaro government, because we already have this kind of system production, but that get worse during this government that is completing 3 years right now, because a lot of the problems that they are doing to increase the deforestation of Amazon, Cerrado, and other biomes, it's getting pushed because you have these setbacks of Brazilian environmental legislation. We have so many right now in the first 2 years. We have the majorities by beyond the executive legal instruments signed by the president or signed by the minister's documents. But this year, that 2021, we have changes of a very important mother laws that we call in Brazil, because it's like a umbrella laws about a lot of issues that complete our environmental big law, our forest code, or our other codes that's very important to keep the protection of nature in Brazil. So some of them I put here, like the land grabbing bill, acaparamiento de tierras, no? Creo que en español, that this land grab bill already passed by the Chamber of Deputies. Now it's going to the tramitation, the Senators' Chamber. It's really, really bad law because they turn legal some kinds of land grabbing. We have also the pesticides bills that's increasing the use of agrotoxic pesticides to Brazilian agrobusiness production, and leave much more flexible the approval of this kind of pesticides. And we have, in the same time, you have some set of national policies and institutions that are being terminated for this government because they are creating a kind of unstructured sectors, or just creating so much trouble to the Brazilian workers in these institutional areas that they can't really work and do whatever the policy and the law says they should do. At the same time, you have a big increase in of violence against the indigenous people, and there is a big campaign that say that no more blood of indigenous people in Brazil, because there is considered a kind of genocide against the indigenous people. Also, with increasing violence against the traditional communities and peasants, leaderships and communities, with using the judiciary institution to take it out a lot of communities for their land, and destroying a lot of agroecological productions in areas that still don't have a regulated right to the land for these communities. We have right now, since the pandemic, also this bring this more of COVID-19, a very huge economic and social environmental situation of disaster, because we have the increasing, incredible increasing of the hunger in Brazil. We don't have this kind of misery. Like if you think about 15 years ago, you didn't see so many people in the street, you didn't see so many children in the street. And right now this is very common and very regular. And of course, we know that in the big cities, when increased poverty, increase a lot also the violence, and especially against children. And where is this connection to the debate in the COP26? Because all this setback of the environmental legislation bring us in a very difficult situation to the implementation, not only for the NDCs, the national contributions from the Paris Agreement, but also with the negotiation that's including, like in the Article 6, bring us a very bad perspective. Like right now in the negotiations, there is some countries, like the coalition of reinforced nations that's composed by some reinforced nations, that's pushing in a very malicious way to put forest offset at Article 6 negotiations. If you people that follow the negotiations of UNFCCC, they know that the forest offsets, it's not included in the Paris Agreement. What is included is the approach of forests in the Article 5, not in Article 6, that's related to the offset, you know? And right now they're trying to do that, pushing this process. And if we have this including the final text that will be approved, you really have a serious impact in the territories of Global South, increasing much more this situation right now. Let's see about if I have time. Okay. So Parna, please tell me. Just finish right now. And what we're doing is
enough time.
okay.
You have enough time.
Okay, thank you. Some strategies and resistance, and also to bring a alternative. There is a lot of process that is being pushing. Some of them already older, some of them updated after the Bolsonaro government, to build not only the resistance but also to keep the life of of the fight, to keep the life alive, the struggles and the alternatives that is doing since then. A lot of, you have the process of the democratization of Brazil in the end of the 80s. So first of one is the constitution, is the building of agroecological territories, free of OGMs, free of pesticides, free of mining, and pushing public policies that was built during the last 15 years, like the program of students food in the schools, the public schools, or the other program of PIA that's related to direct purchase from official institutions to the peasants and family agriculture, like smallholders agriculture, or the Brazilian policy on agroecology also. All these kind of policies are being blocked from the financially, or being unstructured by the government. So we're pushing to keep this alive. At the same time, there is a lot of national articulations. I bring here two that's related more about agroecology and food safety and sovereignty, but you also have the Grupo Carta de Belém that's here in COP, pushing a lot against all these false solutions like net zero, like natural-based solution, and also to forest offsets not enter in the Article 6. Especially 6.2 and 6.4, that's in the game. There is a lot of denounce campaign incidents with a lot of organizations. You have here in COP a very strong, and I think is the biggest indigenous participation from Brazil that's getting very important to denounce and face all these issues. There is the Amazon Assembly right now in the same time that's very strong and potent. And we also have the communities represented here by the Quilombolas as people from CONAC and other ones that are also pushing this kind of alternatives and announce for keep their land rights alive. And today, to finish, there is, I think this space of the People Summit is very, very important for us because it's a space to get together, remotely and also presentially for after a long time because the pandemic, and we know that's still a very complicated moment, but it's still showing that the importance that the Gathering to keep the lives together and globally, because we really need this kind of solidarity, this kind of exchange, and this kind of push to really change the system, because we don't believe that the alternatives that is just proposed inside the negotiations is alternatives that really facing the climate crisis. So thank you very much, and I'll be able to debate more in the moment. Thank you, Suparna, and thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Maureen, and very specific thanks to our tech lead of the coalition. I think we had 2 hacking attempts, and at both times we removed the Zoom bomber. And so thanks to the tech
it's Brazilian agribusiness that's coming here, no problem.
Yeah, so we should fight them out on the ground, not here. Okay, so yeah, I don't think we have very specific questions. So I think if we can continue a bit more linking with what Dennis have already initiated, and Maureen and our Eduardo have touched upon a bit more on how we are feeling and seeing in COP26 in terms of the forest declaration, the net zero, and NBS, false solutions. How are we linking to the issues that that we all are working, and in terms of both the global and national struggles? So if I can start, if I can request Almut to speak a bit more on linkages with what is happening currently in COP26, specifically in terms of the response of the biomass group to the forest declaration. Almut, are you ready?
Yeah, I think you can hear me. Yeah, so basically biomass as such, like fossil fuels, isn't actually being openly discussed in the negotiations as far as I'm aware. I'm not inside the COP. However, what is happening is that industry proponents, including Enviva, this huge pellet company, including Drax, who we've heard about, and others are really using this as an opportunity, using the COP as an opportunity to stage, a number of industry and really greenwashing attempts and come out with new pseudo announcement, I would say, not announcement of things that are completely unforeseen, but dressing up their promises as something amazingly positive. We know that Drax is very active in the Power and Plus Coal Alliance, but they are now also with the World Bioenergy Association. So I think our concern is really what is happening around this in all the more like what you things that are more suitable for a trade show, how big polluters, including the biomass industry, are really exploiting the whole COP26 event to promote themselves and do things that are more like a trade show than climate negotiations. So that's what I would say from my perspective when it comes specifically to bioenergy.
Thanks, Almut. And in the meantime, we have two questions. Maureen, I think both of them are for you. One is, please, can you explain further about Article 6 and why forest offsetting should not be in it? And the second one is, I think, in terms of somebody who is from Hereford, UK, home of Cargill, which is the driver of the deforestation in Brazil. They're asking how can they support the situation in Brazil? Maureen.
Okay, the article, it's because I'm connected also in Zoom before, so just a minute, let me take it out the noise, because I'm feeling an echo. What do you have in Article 6? Now, Article 6, they follow the increase offset, no, because we're talking about two mechanisms that you can compensate emissions from one side to another side. We already have a critical position against the carbon market, because for us, this is not really solution any kind of climate problems. There is a voluntary or official carbon markets around the world for a long time. It's not even be close to a kind of solution. At the same time, forest, it's not the main driver of the climate change. If you remember, 80% of the emissions, it's based on fossil fuels. So even if you can, including and saving all forests in the world, you're not solving the climate crisis. So when you bring these forests offsetting to the negotiations, you are creating distractions to the real problem that's about cutting emissions from the fossil fuels. At the same time, you know that this kind of forest offset products, when they arrive in territories, there is a lot of complications on that. Generally, it's a private contracts that was made between the companies and the population. And there have a lot of problems related to the equilibrium of force, of power between them. There is contracts that take like 20, 30, 50 years that the communities have to be doing whatever the contracts is talking about, the emissions, the carbon emissions, and you change a lot the ways of living of these communities, especially because we do some kinds of stuff that have emissions. But of course, the problem of climate crisis is not related to the emissions of smallholders, is not related to the lives of the indigenous people, and etc. So there is so many problems related to that. There is also scientific that say that you can change or can substitute emissions that you are emitting by fossil fuels and compare it and using the removals from the trees too, because not the same. So many issues that I don't think you can have time here to explain what, but there is thousands of arguments, and we also bring some of them in the report against net zero that's published by 70 organizations and led by Corporate Europe, by Global Forest Coalition, that's called the Big Con. So if Suparna can also include in here in the chat the link, more people can have access about that. And answer, David, it's very good, David, that you are have asked this question. I think there is a lot to do against that. The first thing is expose the company. There is a very important thing to expose the company, because this company, it's in Brazil not only, but it's very connected to all these drivers of deforestation. And even if they say that it's not directly related, because the areas they produce is already the areas that was degraded and blah, 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 it's supporting this kind of attitude of the land grabbing, a person that's going to occupy land and also to burn land, because it's increasing a lot in the last years. Criminal burning, when they put fire in the forest, and then they consolidate the expansion of land area for production, and then this area can be occupied by soybean, regularized, and then produced to Cargill buy and export. So there is already some funds, like Norway funds in the beginning of this year, that cut the funds for Cargill, Bunge, and other soybean companies, because they put the connection between them and this deforestation case in Brazil. So it's very important to expose them here, and if you can keep my contact and also make this connection, So whatever they are doing, try to greenwash their image, it's already contributing a lot to the deforestation, not only the Amazon, but also the Cerrado and Pantanal.
Yeah, just add on to, if I can add to what Maureen had said on both things, right? One should understand that Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is that specific article, which was drafted and agreed to in terms of international cooperation to raise ambition and reduce emission. And so forest offsets or offsets of any kind to not reduce emission, because it is the carbon credit is being used by the buyer to go on emitting and not reduce their emission. So it neither raises ambition nor reduces emission. So that's why we are completely against offsets in Article 6, and also forest offsets. So in that sense, forest offsets is completely a no-no, because there are lots of problems, as you can find, with the REDD+. And we have been arguing for a lot of time, not only the impact on the communities, but in terms of permanence and non-permanence, and then of reversals. There are a lot of arguments that have gone into against forest offsets, a lot of studies. And in terms of Cargill, again, in their net zero pledge of Cargill, we find that even in the US, they are into regenerative agriculture, which is basically what they are talking of is carbon farming, bringing carbon farming under agriculture. And that's another dangerous and a kind of the distractive thing. And so coming back to the panelists, Dennis, do you have anything to add finally to what you have said and your excellent addition in terms of COP26. If you have anything to add, please go ahead.
I want if you add, I can add just comment one point you said about the red plus.
Okay, just a sec, Dennis. Let us finish with Maureen. Yes, Maureen.
No, because you pointed out about the red plus, but it's very important to say that that's the red plus, the official one that's approved inside the Paris Agreement, and it's not only inside the Paris Agreement, it was approved in Warsaw Mechanism. It's payment-based mechanism. It's not a voluntary market of
no.
Right now, what it's trying to do is get worse, you know? It's get worse. So this is very important pointed out to people understand that risk always can get worse.
Yeah.
Pollution while folks are buying and selling our air across the globe and profitizing off of our planet Earth and burning up our planet Earth. And so we're really keen on us leaning into true solutions, true possibilities, jumping right into clean energy. We define clean energy as solar, wind, and geothermal. And so we are adamantly opposed to biomass and bioenergy and the destruction of our forest that we all need just to breathe the air. And when we talk about urban communities, urban Black and brown communities that in fact are lacking forestry, lacking from the benefit and are suffering from heat urban islands and are in need of trees and forests to be, in near proximity. So, so we find this COP26 very important, very inequitable at this juncture. We are wanting to align ourselves with many others across the African diaspora to stand strong in opposition to this and many of the other unjust decisions that are occurring here in COP26. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Coming back to Eduardo. Eduardo, in terms of the forest declaration that we had on the second day of the COP, how do you relate and what is your reaction to the forest declaration, and how do you relate to the Chilean forestry situation at this point of time, and again linking to the false solutions that you were talking of, Eduardo?
Sí, bueno, en nuestro caso somos muy escépticos de la real voluntad de los gobiernos, fundamentalmente de las grandes potencias, de enfrentar en su raíz las problemáticas. Creemos que los problemas de la deforestación en nuestra región, como el caso más emblemático, ¿no es cierto?, que se ha planteado de la Amazonía, no depende solamente de cómo se enfrentan comercialmente la relación con el Brasil de Bolsonaro, ¿ya?, y con las políticas de deforestación. Creemos que efectivamente lo que se requiere, y en ese sentido no tienen mucho que decir los actuales gobiernos, y en ese sentido también respondiendo a la pregunta que se hacía de qué hacer en relación al problema que se está viviendo en Brasil y en otros lugares del mundo con la deforestación, fundamentalmente nuestro enfoque es de articularnos, es de organizarnos para incidir no en las negociaciones, no concentrarnos en las negociaciones climáticas cada año en torno a la COP, sino de manera permanente e incidir, estamos construyendo, que son finalmente los que dependen, en el caso de Europa, por ejemplo, dependen del extractivismo en regiones como las nuestras. Entonces, mientras eso no se modifique, probablemente si por ejemplo, se establece una moratoria a la deforestación en la Amazonía, bueno, esa deforestación entonces se va a comenzar a realizar en otro lugar del mundo, ¿ya? Y en otro lugar del mundo se va a incrementar el extractivismo. Mientras no se modifiquen los proyectos políticos en todo el mundo, ¿ya? Es decir, mientras no logremos incidir en las políticas públicas, ¿ya? Y que más allá de las NDCs, ¿no es cierto?, asociadas al Acuerdo de París, las políticas, ¿ya? Extractivistas que promueven la deforestación en nuestros países, pero al mismo tiempo que son impulsadas por acuerdos comerciales, por acuerdos de libre comercio y por formas de vida, ¿ya? Que requieren del extractivismo en todo el mundo para mantener niveles de vida que son absolutamente insustentables. Mientras eso no ocurra, realmente no se va a resolver el cambio climático, ¿ya? Las soluciones son eminentemente políticas, ¿ya? Y eso es lo que se debe fomentar a partir de los debates que se dan en la Cumbre de los Pueblos y en torno a la COP26, pero que fundamentalmente se debe impulsar de manera articulada, de manera permanente en nuestros territorios, haciendo las distinciones entre las realidades culturales, económicas que hay entre los países del norte global y los países del sur global y entre las distintas regiones, ¿ya? Pero necesariamente deben ser deben ser soluciones articuladas y entre todas las organizaciones de nuestros países. Eso.
Eduardo, I can see some chats in Spanish. Can you respond? Just in the chat box, if you can see a couple of comments in Spanish.
Creo que se refería a una compañera que no estaba escuchando bien.
About tech issues?
Pero al parecer...
Okay.
Sí,
okay.
creo que era técnico y creo que el problema era solamente de la compañera.
Okay. Thank you. So coming back to our last panelist, again, Maureen. I know you had a very strong comment on the Forest Declaration in terms of having agreements and declarations outside the multilateral fora. Can you just briefly kind of explain what is happening at this point of time? Because at one point, you are declaring having something within the premises of UNFCCC, which is a multilateral fora. But what you are doing basically is getting the declaration away from the multilateral fora into more, clubs and groups kind of arrangement, which is basically breaking down the multilateral fora, but not strengthening it. Yeah, Maureen.
Yeah, because these declarations that was announced during the high-level segment by the presidents of the country that was here, and of course you have like 100 nations that sign up, like the Forest Declaration, we have the Agriculture, Trade Commodities Declaration. There is also the Forest Pledges made on by 12 rich countries during this time. All this, it's outside the UNFCCC. All these announcements, it's not inside the regime, it's outside the regime. And this is a very complicated thing, because instead of these countries is strengthening the regime and trying to face together the climate change, they are creating things outside that's generally bilateral. So you don't have the same kind of equilibrium of power between countries from the north and the south, and also no regulation because each country will push related to their own national matters, to how they will give this money, how they will, what is the modalities they will create, what is the obligations they will push the countries and communities, whatever, like the indigenous fund they are creating also. So it's very scary how they are working outside the regime. If you see in G20 declaration in the meeting, also what we notice from the inside debate, there is some countries that even don't want to mention the COP26 or don't want to mention the UNFCCC inside the final declaration. So this is a very scary thing, because even if you are bad with this system, because the false solution, imagine if you only have a system that you don't have any kind of participation of the global south. This COP, it's already being blamed by not inclusive, because the countries of global south, it's facing the very hard period. Still have a lot of countries that doesn't have vaccine, it doesn't facing very strong moment against the pandemic of COVID-19, and even that they make this COP, so they're not respectful between them. So I think this is a very important debate that you have to put on.
Yes, thanks to all the panelists, and more power to those who are there on the ground in Glasgow. And so we thank all the panelists here today for an excellent discussion and debate. We also thank COP26 Coalition's tech leads and the interpreters for their great support and help, and of course to ward off the Zoom bombers. And on behalf of Global Forest Coalition, Colectivo VientoSur, Biofuelwatch, and FASE, I thank you all. And I think a couple of minutes left. I think we can hand it over to our COP26 Coalition colleagues and comrades. Perhaps Samuel will come in here. I don't know. It's up to you, our comrades in COP26 Coalition.
From the levellers to those who trespassed at Kinder Scout, ordinary people are the ones who change history.
Muchas gracias a todos, compañeras, compañeros. Hasta pronto.
Chao, chao. Muchas gracias.